Well, hello. My name is Kempton Hewitt. Typically, my videos are up every week focusing on one of the texts in the Revised Common Lectionary for the coming week, primarily as an aid for those who are preparing to preach, as well as some lay folks who follow with great faithfulness and are willing to follow a more academic discussion. What I'm doing today is quite different. I'm talking about the texts from the New Testament Gospels that will appear in depth and at length during Holy Week. I'm speaking partly as a historian and partly as someone who has been a functioning ordained clergy both in the pulpit and in the classroom for over 50 years. Some decades ago, the Holy See of the Roman Catholic Church itself put out an advisory with the force of the Vatican to all pastors and priests that when these texts about the trial and death of Jesus are read, that they be done with pastoral, contextual interpretation. Now, this notification is a result of prior many decades of soul searching on the part of the Vatican with regard to its failure to speak and act in ways that were clearly antithetical to the slaughter of Jews during the Holocaust. Now, these texts that you'll be reading, some of them in great length, that detail the last hours and days of Jesus' life, including, of course, the arrest and the trial and the death and resurrection of Jesus. Some of these texts have actually been the source of Jewish persecution in many lands, but most especially throughout the Mediterranean basin and in Europe, all parts of Europe. That is a sin to be repented of. It was a sin based partially on ignorance, still a serious sin. One of the most feared days in the Jewish ghettos of Europe, or even the Jewish quarters or neighborhood. The most feared day was at the end, particularly of Matthew's account on Good Friday, in which, as you will remember, only in Matthew, the crowds respond to Pilate's entreaty by saying, "Let his blood be upon us and upon our children." It was not infrequent for hordes and mobs of worshipers after that service to run through neighborhoods and beating and in other ways intimidating Jews. I think you might be well shocked if you took a very, very private, secretive poll amongst parishioners and would find that many believe that Jews stand guilty for the death of Jesus. And now let me speak as a historian. After the Holocaust, there was intensive international study of all the documentation possible to try to determine what actually was the process by which Jesus was sent to die. The sum total of that purely historical research, without reference to matters of faith or doctrine or dogma, it was a Roman death. Remember, Gospels like Matthew have to be dated somewhere in the 90s, possibly the 80s, but more likely the 90s. By that time, there was a sharp negative division between Jewish converts to the Jesus way, what you might call the church, and those who now had suffered the loss of the temple and were processing the meaning of their faith and a place of Torah and prayer in their lives. It is this sharp conflict that creates the narratives we have in the Gospels. Now that is just falling off the log easy. There can be really no serious debate about that. Pastors have an obligation when they are dealing with these texts to expressly and overtly and with pastoral care interpret these texts, which, if enacted right off the page, would lead many who are not students of history or who have inherited anti-Semitic views and harbored them to conclude the wrong thing. Jesus was a Jew. He quoted the Hebrew texts. He lived the life of a Jew. He accumulated around him Jewish followers. And to a person, the immediate followers of Jesus, men and women, were Jewish, with the possible exception, of some very, very well-placed Hellenistic women who were converts both to Judaism and to the Jesus way. And so we remember that it was a late breakthrough, that we were grafted into the olive branch of Judaism, as Paul says. We are, by adoption, the children of Abraham and Sarah. We need, as pastors, to make sure that not a shadow of doubt remains, as we have perhaps enactment of crowds crying out, "Let his blood be upon us," and explain. This takes some courage. I'm aware that probably the majority of pastors, maybe 90%, present these Gospels as historical documents describing what actually happened at the time. We can do better. All of the division and the conflict and the wars and the suffering that are created in this world by one religion attacking the other and enculturating that hatred, we've had enough of that. So even if what you do to attempt to deal with this in a better way is shrugged off, you still have a moral obligation to do this. Well, thanks for listening. And the other video that's going up is going to be my invitation to think very thoughtfully about that repeating gospel text of Easter morning found in John 20. So thanks for sticking with this one. Goodbye.